Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to talk something which is called as lists. So lists in Python, as the name suggests, is actually used to store a list of items in your code. So let's say you are designing a movie review website and you actually want to store a bunch of movie names into something. So list is a data structure which is provided by Python, which allows you to store a list of items in one place. So we will actually be designing some websites at the end of this course. So we will design some site in which we will use lists. So it is extremely important concept which you need to learn, because most of the data which in Python is actually stored in the form of list, and list actually is, you could say, like an alternative to arrays. So if you're familiar with other programming languages, then list is somewhat similar to that of arrays in other programming language. So without wasting any time, let's go ahead and directly jump into the Python code. So here in this tutorial, we will be creating simple list of people. So we will be having names of people stored into a list, and we will learn how to actually access the names stored in that particular list. So let's go ahead and create a simple list of names. So what you need to do in order to create a list is that you need to name the list as something. So in this case, as we will be storing names of people, we will type in name, or let's say names equal, and for mentioning that this thing right here is a list, you need to actually use square brackets. And after having the square brackets, what you need to do is that you need to go ahead in between the square brackets, and in double quotes you need to specify the names of people. So let's type in some random names like Mike. So this is one item in the list, and in order to specify another item, you need to go here, give a comma, and again in double quotes specify the new item, which is, let's say, John, and you need to have some space over here. Again, give a comma, have some space. Let's say the third item in your list is Rob. So as you could see, we have created a simple list here which consists of names of three people, which is Mike, John, and Rob. Now what if we actually print out the list itself? So if we type in print, and to print, if you pass in the list itself, which is names. So if you essentially save the code and if you run it, as you could see, when you print out the list, or if you directly pass in the list name to print, it is going to simply print out what is stored in the list. So it is actually going to include the square brackets, the commas, as well as the quotations. Now one more way of printing out the elements of list is by specifying the index of the list. So a list actually has positions into it. So for example, as we have three things in our list, so Mike is actually stored at the first position, John is stored at the second position, and Rob is stored at the third position in the list. But the first position is actually having an index 0. So at index 0 in the list names we have Mike, at index 1 in the list names we have John, and at index number 2 we have Rob. So if we actually need to print out what is actually stored in index number 0 position at index number 0, so you could simply go here in front of names, specify a square bracket, and in the square bracket you need to mention the index. So if you want to check what is stored at the index position 0, so you could simply pass in 0 here. So if you save the code now, and if you try to run this, as you could see, you will get the result as Mike, because Mike is actually present at the 0th position. And if you actually change this to 1, save the code, and if you run it, as you could see, at the first position we have John, and at the third position, or sorry, the second position, we have Rob. So if we replace this 1 by 2, save the code, and if you run it, as you could see, you will have Rob here. Now you could also actually go ahead and store numerical values into the list. So for example, if we delete this entire thing, and if you make a new list which is called as numbers, so what you could essentially do is that as we are storing integer values, you don't need to mention them in single quotes. So you could simply type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, if you print out the numbers list, so if you save the code and if we execute, as you could see, the list is going to be printed out. Now even if you specify an index position here, that is if you want to check what is stored at the 4th position. So if you save the code and if you run it, as you could see, you will get an answer 5, because 1 is stored at the 0th position, 2 is stored at the 1st position, 3 at 2, 4 at 3, and 5 is actually stored at the index position 4. And one more thing which I would like to mention is that you could even have an empty list. So let's say you want to create a list in your code, but you don't want to use it right now. So you could just name your list as some random thing like ABC, and you could simply type in equals, and right after this equals, you could simply specify the square brackets and you could have essentially nothing into the list. So if you go ahead and if you try to print out this list, which is called as ABC, and if you actually run the code, as you could see, you will get an empty list. So this thing right here is called as empty list. So that's it for this lecture, and I actually wanted to cover some basics of list in this lecture, and in the next lecture we will be learning some operations which are related to list. So that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you guys in the next lecture. Thank you.